Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are wading into, well, a really unique situation where celebrity, big business, and personal life all crash into each other. We're doing a deep dive into a billion-dollar financial decision.
That's right. And that decision is the reported refusal by Rihanna to sign a post-nuptial agreement with AAP Rocky, even though she's sitting on an empire that's estimated to be worth around $1.4 billion.
The headlines, they all focus on the drama. But we want to look beyond that. Our mission today is to use this one choice, this very high-stakes refusal, as a kind of critical lens.
Mm-hmm.
We want to understand that huge friction that happens when love, trust, and complex legal structures all collide under a massive public microscope. What are the real implications here, financially, legally, and personally?
Exactly. This isn't just celebrity gossip. I mean, this is basically a masterclass in modern asset protection and the human element behind it all.
Okay, so let's unpack this. We have to start with that colossal number, $1.4 billion. When you hear that, your first thought might be, simple assets, cash, real estate, a private jet, maybe.
Right.
But with a fortune built the way hers was, what exactly is a legal structure like this trying to protect?
That initial assumption that it's just money in the bank, that's the biggest misconception, really. Rihanna's wealth it's structurally different. The crucial majority of her net worth doesn't come from passive income. It stems from complex, actively managed intellectual property, IP.
So if we break that IP down, what are we actually looking at?
Well, there are two very distinct rivers of income here, and they're treated very differently under family law. On one side, you have the whole Fenty empire, Fenty Beauty, Fenty Skin, Savage X Fenty.
Okay.
That valuation is tied to equity, future growth projections, all those manufacturing partnerships, leadership. It's a dynamic, actively managed business.
It means dividing it would mean valuing future potential, not just what's in the bank today.
Precisely. Now, on the other side, you have her music catalog. Yeah. This is a much more mature asset. It's generating long-term, predictable royalty streams, her rights to her masters, her publishing. They're often securitized.
What does that mean, securitized?
They're treated almost like bonds. So if she signed an agreement, the lawyers would be arguing over how to value the equity of a cosmetics line, which is super volatile, versus the sort of fixed value of a decades-long music royalty stream. It's an administrative nightmare. And it affects her future borrowing capacity, her brand leverage, everything.
Wow. So every clause in a post-nup isn't just about dividing things if the worst happens. It's about influencing her brand's current value, its leadership, its ability to innovate next year.
Absolutely. Her wealth is just. Yeah. It's intrinsically tied to her creative and personal identity. Losing even partial control over the Fenty structure isn't just a financial hit. It's a loss of sovereign control over the brand she built. And that, frankly, could alter the entire trajectory of her business life. That's why the stakes are just so incredibly high.
This level of complexity just screams for a contract. Yet the reported refusal is still there. So we have to talk about the human element. If the logic is so compelling, why is the emotional resistance reportedly so strong?
Because emotional attachment can, and often does, override the sharpest financial reasoning, especially when you're negotiating the terms of trust in what you hope is a lifelong partnership. Rihanna's reported reluctance, it really taps into a universal impulse, the desire to protect the emotional core of the relationship above all else. A contract just feels like preparing for failure.
And for someone who didn't inherit wealth, who built this empire brick by brick, that money is so much more than just a resource, isn't it?
Oh, it becomes legacy. It becomes a manifestation of self. When that money represents 2 decades of just relentless work, legal boundaries feel deeply personally invasive. Signing a contract, especially a post-nuptial one, forces a couple to explicitly define how her success gets treated inside their union.
It's defining identity within a shared life. That brings us to that crucial insight from the family law attorney we looked at, which just nails this dynamic.
Yes, that quote is unforgettable. In wealthy partnerships, the hardest negotiations aren't about assets. They're about feelings disguised as financial decisions.
That is so true. Can you give us an example of what that looks like on the ground?
Sure. Think about a typical dispute in a high net worth divorce. They might spend months fighting over the valuation of one specific property or a stock portfolio. But the underlying conflict isn't about the dollar amount. It's about unspoken resentments. It's about one partner feeling they sacrificed their own career so the other could become a billionaire.
Wow.
So the negotiation over the $10 million house is really a negotiation over who validated whose life, whose career mattered more.
That just reframes the entire legal process. For Rihanna, where her career and her reputation are globally intertwined with her partners, the emotional cost of that document could feel like it outweighs the financial reassurance.
Absolutely. And when you're trying to preserve the privacy of a relationship that's watched by hundreds of millions, a formal contract can feel like a declaration of fragility. It's also interesting there's a sociological trend where billionaire women often place a higher strategic weight on sort of maintaining emotional harmony than their male counterparts do.
Especially when their business relies on public perception.
Exactly, on relatability. Public fracture equals brand risk.
It makes sense. But this leads us to challenge a common assumption, that post-nups are all about distrust or foreshadowing a split. In this world, that's just way too narrow.
It's entirely too simple.
Yeah.
For ultra-high net worth couples, especially ones leading global brands, these documents are less about a breakup and more about business governance. They're business continuity plans. They're essential structural stabilizers.
Stabilizers, I like that word. How do they function that way?
Well, they set clear expectations around assets that are already tangled up with global markets and public perception. When you have a career that can shift overnight, clear legal outlines prevent a small, common marital dispute, say, over buying a house from escalating into a multi-million-dollar complication that paralyzes the whole company.
And we have seen what happens when you skip this step.
Yeah.
That cautionary tale about the high-profile actress who put it off.
Yeah.
It's a real warning about the cost of prioritizing comfort over clarity.
It's a classic Hollywood insider story. This actress launched a super successful production company during her marriage, but she just kept delaying the financial agreement. When the divorce finally happened, years later, the ex-spouse was legally able to claim partial ownership, not just of the assets, but of the future intellectual property of the company.
Oh, wow. So he owned a piece of her creative future.
Exactly. Every new project pitch, every script she wanted to greenlight, every distribution deal, it all had to be negotiated with the ex-spouse. The next few years were just spent in litigation. It drained her creative energy, and ultimately, the public perception became that she'd lost control. For Rihanna, whose business relies entirely on agility and brand integrity, that kind of legal limbo would be disastrous.
The lesson is clear. Waiting turns a private choice into a public business disaster. So if that's the risk, we have to look at why crafting a post-nup for this couple is such a massive obstacle course. It goes way beyond just standard wealth management.
It does. Let's start with a layer people often overlook, the birth of children. Once you introduce shared children, the stakes just rise dramatically.
How does that specifically complicate the financial documents?
Well, parenting fundamentally changes everything. Responsibility, custody expectations, and critically long-term asset planning. For celebrity parents, the agreements have to meticulously define guardianship, education funds, inheritance structures, all protected from future legal claims. The whole conversation shifts from protecting the couple to protecting the next generation.
And then you layer on the external pressures around AP Rocky. He's had his own set of legal complications, pending cases, controversies.
This is a huge strategic exposure. Any external legal issue involving one partner creates a ripple effect. It impacts shared financial planning and, more importantly for Rihanna, reputational risk. Most major brand contracts today, especially in beauty and fashion, have aggressive morality clauses.
So if AP Rocky's legal situation resolved unfavorably, that could, in theory, trigger clauses in her business partnerships.
Precisely. If a partner's public actions create material negative press, it can jeopardize joint endorsements. It can even allow her business partners to renegotiate deals. A post-nup, drafted properly, should have specific clauses to protect the shared wealth and Fenty's equity from the fallout of his independent legal issues. It's protection against shared liability, not just against divorce.
That adds a whole new dimension. But the complexity doesn't stop there because Fenty is a global operation.
That's the hidden killer. The international footprint. Rihanna is a national hero in Barbados, has a primary residence in the U.S., and Fenty operates all across Europe and Asia. That means numerous jurisdictions with profoundly different marriage and property laws all come into play.
You're talking about clashing legal systems, like community property versus equitable distribution applied to the same revenue stream.
Exactly. For example, if a dispute were handled in a jurisdiction that favors community property, assets generated during the marriage might be split 50-50, regardless of who earned them. So crafting one document to override all these different laws requires just meticulous cross-border coordination to prevent a legal loophole in, say, the EU from invalidating a clause drafted for the U.S.
It's an exercise in preemptive global legal warfare. And finally, let's talk about how rapidly these contracts are evolving to keep up with digital wealth.
This is where it gets really interesting and where Rihanna is right on the cutting edge. These agreements aren't built around just real estate and stocks anymore. They're being built specifically for IP-driven, identity monetizing wealth.
Meaning they're truly becoming brand strategy documents. So what are the newest clauses being included now?
The standard is shifting. We're now seeing agreements that address social media conduct, to prevent the airing of private business information. But the truly innovative clauses cover things like AI likeness rights, metaverse asset control, and long-term royalty structures tied to digital avatars or digital goods.
AI likeness rights. That's fascinating. What is the risk there?
Well, if the contract doesn't explicitly state ownership, there's a risk a partner could claim a stake in the digital asset used to train an AI model of Rihanna's voice or image. As performers increasingly monetize their digital future, securing the rights to your synthetic self becomes one of the largest assets to protect. The Post-Nup for someone like Rihanna is a strategic document forecasting the monetization of tech 5 to 10 years out.
So what does this whole obstacle course mean for us, the everyday person? We don't have 1.4 billion, but we are, increasingly monetizing our own identities, our side hustles.
Rihanna's situation really illuminates a broader truth that applies to everyone. Modern wealth is complex. It blurs the lines of ownership far more than people assume. If you have a side hustle, run a small digital business, own crypto, or have any substantial online content, those are your own forms of IP. They're hard to value, hard to divide, and the legal rules are way more nuanced than just splitting a bank account.
It seems like the spotlight on them just magnifies how intricate these intersections have become for everyone. Her reported choice highlights this deeply human challenge, doesn't it? Balancing love with protection, privacy with professional responsibility, and partnership with the fierce independence of one's own legacy.
This is the central tension we started with. She's navigating a monumental financial decision while trying to preserve the most basic human connection: trust. It's a profound moment because when your brand is inseparable from who you are, when your business is literally your name and your face, any document touching it becomes a statement of self, a statement of priority. It's not just a financial contract anymore.
And that forces a confrontation with an emotional clarity that, thankfully, few of us will ever have to face on that kind of scale.
Which leaves us with this final thought. Consider the cost of that clarity. When you define the terms of a separation, you are forced to define the terms of your union. In the highest echelons of wealth, is the price of total legal protection worth the potential erosion of emotional security? That is the billion-dollar question Rihanna is reportedly answering every single day.